The federal government has denied political interference in AFP raids on the Australian Workers' Union offices in Sydney and Melbourne. The Registered Organisations Commission, an independent regulator of unions and employee associations, is investigating a $100,000 donation made to activist organisation Get Up in 2006 when opposition leader Bill Shorten ran the union. There are also questions about whether the union followed its own processes for approving a $25,000 donation to opposition leader Bill Shorten's 2007 election campaign. Labor and the union deny any wrongdoing, saying the allegations are a smear and the raids are an abuse of power. Liberal Democrat Senator David Leyonhjelm voted to reinstate the Australian Building and Construction Commission and to establish the Registered Organisations Commission. He joins me now from Parliament House. Welcome to RN Drive.
Good afternoon.
Is this what you voted for?
No, I didn't anticipate that the law would be used in this fashion. I have to say I'm rather concerned about it. It's early days yet. Obviously, we don't have all the information, but I am somewhat concerned that the legal process is being used in this fashion.
What are you specifically concerned about? What alarms you?
Well, even if all the allegations about the AWU processes are true, and they didn't follow their own procedure, the money shouldn't have been paid, and AWU members missed out as a consequence of that. How does that justify having the police conduct raids on something, especially when it was 10 years ago? It's fairly heavy-handed treatment, I have to say. To
be clear, the AWU denies that they didn't go through the processes. I'm just saying that so that it's on the record. That's their claim. And of course, some of this is in the courts too in terms of whether the exchange of these documents. The police are not going to do anything with these documents until that court case is resolved. They reconvene on Friday, I understand. Labor and the AWU have described these raids as an abuse of power. Do you think that's too strong? Do you think it's an abuse of power?
Well, as I said, it's early days yet, and the AWU is appealing, as you said, against the warrants, and so the courts will have an opinion on that. I'd have to say, if I was the judge being asked to grant a warrant to the Registered Organisations Commission and to get the police to help me enforce that warrant, and I was told that this concerned payments by the AWU that may not have followed their procedures and that they occurred 10 years ago, I would need an awful lot of persuading to grant a warrant under those circumstances. So either the process of giving the warrant was abnormally lenient on the government and inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt, or there's a lot of information about this that we don't know about yet. Hopefully that will come out when the AWU appeals the warrant.
The AFP says they had to act because the allegation is that the documents would have been destroyed and that they haven't done raids in other cases because they've been able to obtain the documents. Now, the AWU has denied this. What do you make of that?
Well, it's kind of a little bit hard to believe that the AWU would have kept documents around for the last 10 years and then suddenly said, oh, oops, we might destroy them now. That kind of, is a bit hard to believe. If they were in breach of their own procedures and somebody wanted to cover their tracks, and these are all ifs, I'm not making assertions here. If that was the case, you would expect that they might have destroyed any documentation that would leave fingerprints long ago, and not suddenly said, "Oh, crikey, it's on the front page of a newspaper. We better do something about it now." I find it all a bit hard to accept. If
you're just tuning in, my guest is Liberal Democrat Senator David Leyonhjelm. I'm Patricia Karvelas. This is RN Drive. Our number 0418 226 576. That's the text line if you want to text in and give me your views on these raids, which have become, I've got to say, a part of the political circus in Canberra now. Are you concerned that the media appears to have been tipped off ahead of the raids? Because, wow, I mean, that is pretty extraordinary. The media are all ready to film before the police even arrive.
Yes, this is becoming a pattern, and it's very unhealthy. The police or some authority will give the media a tip-off, and then it becomes nightly news, or the news on the TV or newspapers or whatever. It's becoming all too common. This is by no means the first. In fact, it's quite a regular occurrence. And it's dangerous, in my opinion. I mean, at the end of the day, the people involved are not guilty. All that has occurred is the police are gathering evidence. That's what warrants are all about. They're gathering evidence. It doesn't prove that the evidence, or doesn't establish that the evidence is going to prove the case that might be alleged against them. It may well be that they are totally, completely innocent. And yet the mud has been thrown at them through the media via this alerting system that seems to be almost routine these days. It's a very unhealthy trend, and I think they should get over it. One of these days, a judge will get cranky about it, and they will acquit someone or give them the benefit of the doubt simply because that process has occurred, and it can't come too soon, in my view.
Labor and NXT leader Nick Xenophon have called for an independent inquiry to establish who tipped off the media before the AFP raids. Would you support that?
Well, yes, although I'd be surprised if an inquiry would find out. But yes, and I wouldn't want it to stop just at this incident either. There's way too many incidences or similar incidences where the police tip off the media, and you've got somebody being arrested or somebody being raided, and it's all over the TV news and the newspaper. And, for people who don't understand the legal process, they've never bothered to inquire how it's all going to work out. They automatically assume that people involved are guilty. And very, very difficult to undo the damage to reputations and relationships and so on that flow from that kind of assumption. And in many cases, I'm not saying in many cases, but certainly in cases where this has occurred, the people whose names have been besmirched have been totally innocent.
And the Registered Organisations Commission has today agreed not to receive, as I mentioned, any of the seized AWU documents while it waits for the federal court to rule on a legal challenge to the raids. The union has mounted a legal challenge to the raids. Should there be consequences for the Registered Organisations Commission if the raid is found to be unlawful?
Well, they will certainly learn a lesson. The normal process, as I understand it, I'm not a lawyer, is that they would be able to seek costs. The AWU would be able to seek costs against the Registered Organisations Commission for taking that action. So I would think that they will pay a penalty for it. And if the warrants are set aside by the court, and if that was to occur, then presumably they wouldn't do it again, so nobody else would have to suffer that. The Registered Organisations Commission, as I'm sure you know, has new powers as a result of the act that went through. It was never envisaged that it would be used with the help of the AFP to go raiding union offices, though, in this fashion.
So let's talk about that then, because yes, it's a new organisation, it has new powers, the Registered Organisations Commission. You say it's early days, but can you see yet a case to change its powers, to control its powers, law reform?
Well, it is a function of law reform in the first place. Now, if the court says, and bear in mind, we don't necessarily know all the facts, we only know what's been released, but suppose the court says, no, that warrant to raid the offices of the AWU was improperly granted, that's recourse, that's legal recourse, and that's the appropriate way to do it. If the court says no, the warrant was legitimate, then presumably there's more to it than what we know on the face of it, the amount of evidence we have available. If I was in the shoes of the magistrate or the judge, I'm not sure I'd be granting any injunctions, or any warrants, I should say. So, but there is recourse, and thank goodness for that. I mean, the nice thing about our legal system is that so far, at least, we haven't lost the right to go to the court and say, I have been denied justice. You can go to a court and say, what's been done to me is wrong. I'd like an injunction, or I'd like a court order, or I'd like something done to set it right. And while we have that available, we should be grateful and we should use it. And the Registered Organisations Commission will find out whether it was on solid ground or not as soon as the appeal against the granting of those warrants is decided.
David Leyonhjelm, thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
That's Liberal Democrat Senator David Leyonhjelm, and you heard him there. He actually backs an inquiry as well. Labor now calling for an inquiry. Nick Xenophon calling for an inquiry into the tip-off on these raids, and David Leyonhjelm, who is, from the right side of politics, concerned about the way this is all looking. 0418 226 576 is the text line. This is RN Drive. You can also tweet us. We have a Twitter handle. It's called @RN Drive, and also a hashtag you can use called RN Drive, with a hashtag, of course, which is a good way to join the conversation about this. What do you make of the raids? And I suppose the way they're being used in the parliament now. I mean, Question Time was dominated by this issue. The Labor Party saying that this is a witch hunt, that this is political. The government saying we operate at arm's length. But of course, they've constructed now this commission. This is now the Registered Organisations Commission, and this is the kind of work it can do. We will see in the courts whether this particular raid was warranted. This will be dealt with in the courts. We'll know on Friday. This is RN Drive.